This is Colin O'Keefe for LXBN TV. The Department of Justice announced on Monday of this week that it had planned to charge 5 members of China's army with hacking into the networks of United States companies and stealing corporate secrets. Joining me now to explain what happened and its potential impact is attorney Stewart Baker. He previously served at both the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security. He is now at Steptoe Johnson, where he is also an author on the firm Steptoe Cyberblog. Stewart, first, just how big of a problem is this type of thing? We first caught wind of this type of thing happening from China roughly a year ago, but in your experience, just how prevalent and impactful is this type of hacking?
Well, attacks are very common. I once asked an FBI former official how many of the AmLaw 100 he thought had been compromised by the PLA, and he said about 100. So it is a serious problem, and it has been. It's not that cyber espionage hasn't gone on before, but most of the other nations that do it are selective and cautious and don't want to get caught. What has distinguished the PLA is they haven't really cared that they get caught. And the evidence in this indictment of the 5 individual members of the PLA comes from evidence they left behind in their attacks. Much of it was disclosed publicly by Mandiant in the report that came out about a year ago, identifying by name many of the attackers. And I think Mandiant even found one of them had written a blog about how unhappy he was with his life and how boring it was to break into the computers of the Fortune 500.
Wow, and then second, with these charges, the United States has seemingly drawn a line with China on corporate espionage, but is there something more that they should have done previously, or is there something more that they should be doing now to stop this type of hacking coming from China?
So this is new. When we catch spies spying, we prosecute them if they're in the country. What's unusual here is that while the effects of the espionage took place on American soil, the guys who were doing it were in China the whole time. And up to now, no one has charged another government's agents with espionage, with one exception. The Russians charged 2 American FBI agents with crimes when they used a password that they'd gotten from a Russian hacker while he was in Seattle after they'd arrested him to log back onto his computer in St. Petersburg. And the Russians said that was a violation of their sovereignty, and they indicted but have never been able to prosecute the agents. And of course, that's the problem here. The likelihood that these 5 PLA members are going to come to the United States for trial is very low. It's not zero because they are relatively young. They do not want to be doing this for a living. They want to graduate from the PLA and get a good job in the tech sector in China. And that means they're going to have to travel, and sooner or later they could make a mistake and find themselves arrested. So it will have an impact either on their careers or possibly will result in their arrest. But it's still largely symbolic, and it's a sign that the United States has run out of patience and is no longer deterred by the prospect that China will say, well, Snowden says you do it too, or that China will say, well, we'll find somebody of yours to charge with a crime too. Those things have not influenced the government's decision to pursue this.
I see. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. As mentioned, the United States has seemingly wagged a finger at China more or less, and we'll have to see how China responds after being so brash with this type of thing previously. Once again, that was Stewart Baker of Steptoe Johnson. For more of his insight, be sure to visit their publication. It is at steptoecyberblog.com. Thank you for joining me today, Stewart.
And we now have a podcast, the Steptoe Cyber Law Podcast, on which we discussed this for probably 20 minutes. So for people who want to see more go to the Steptoe Cyber, want to hear more, it's not video, go to the Steptoe Cyber Law podcast.